Every journey gets us closer to the same truth. We all need connection.
You are watching In Conversation This Week with Miceal O'Hurley.
This is Miceal O'Hurley with Diplomacy in Ireland, European Diplomat, with a special report live from Kyiv. I'm joined by the editor of the Kyiv Post, the largest English newspaper in Ukraine. Bodhan, how are you?
I'm fine, but let me just stress at the outset, I have evacuated. I am in Barcelona. I'm running the Kyiv Post from here, but remotely. So I am in direct contact with my staff and have my finger on the pulse.
Thank you for clarifying that. I understand that your newspaper was subjected to numerous cyber attacks. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, once the bombing had started, or rather the missile attacks on Kiev in the early morning of yesterday, we tried to get the news up, but found that we were under massive cyber attacks. We were getting 600,000 or so calls apparently at one time, or I can't remember now from the technicians whether 6,000 at a time or 600,000. Anyway, we were told that we were swamped and that this was knocking us down. It took us half the day to get a semi-decent service back up.
Are people able to get almost real-time news from the Kyiv Post now?
Yes, because we are also utilizing social media. So we are posting shortened versions of the news on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, for example. Yes, people are sending us news, and photographs, and we're getting reports from all over the country.
So I've reported on wars for 30 years. One of the first things that goes is electricity. Do people have power at this point? Is it spotty? Tell me about that.
It's surprisingly good, even in Kiev. We expected on the first day that the attacks on the infrastructure would be aimed at knocking out electricity and internet. But at this stage, even as we hear gunfire in the outskirts of the city, of the capital, the electricity is still largely functioning and the internet system is working. So people are being informed. They are listening to instructions from the authorities. And they're able to contact one another.
Are you able to be in contact with your journalist in the field?
I'm in contact with a hardcore who are putting out the publication, but several have already left to villages. Several are in bomb shelters. Some of my key people, for example, this morning, they told me we are sheltering, we're under fire. So yes, we have, shall we say, a hardcore of very dedicated people working at this moment.
Within the last few minutes, I've received a text from a friend in one of the northern suburbs of Kyiv saying that there's fighting on the street. How bad do you think it is in Kyiv right now?
What's uncertain at this stage is this the avant-garde of the forces from Russia that broke through yesterday through the Chernobyl zone mainly and took the ill-fated Chernobyl atomic power station with all the serious implications of that. It's a splinter group, the remnants of an airborne force that tried to take an airport in Hostomel, which is very near Kyiv, but which has the country's largest runway where the Antonov planes land. The idea was that the Russians would take it, hold it, and last night Bellingcat already reported that big Russian military planes had flown out of Pskov flying for Kiev. But the Ukrainian forces obviously knew this and managed to retake the airport in Hostomel, but several dozen of the Russian paratroopers that were there clearly regrouped and are fighting their way in the suburbs of Kiev.
Is there a situation in which the Ukrainians are starting to crater runways to put them beyond use for the Russians so that they don't further use them to take the country?
There have been numerous reports about strategic bridges near Kiev, incidentally, also being blown up, but certainly in the south of the country. They are trying to stop saboteurs and agents from marking roads and setting up, I guess, electronic devices that guide rockets to targets, which have been found. So instructions have gone out on TV and on radio to the population to help in this, but the population is also being instructed to arm. There are instructions on how to make Molotov cocktails, for example. And yesterday, as you know, mobilization was declared. So all able-bodied fighting men today are being issued with arms. This is something also very new in the country because, you know, we've had a lot of internal unrest and disaffected veterans coming back from the front lines, etc. But the risk has been taken and arms are being distributed, and we're seeing long queues of men up to the age of 60 waiting to receive their weapons.
I've been watching The Wire and looking at satellite photos almost in real time. I do see Russian tanks that have been taken out with Javelin weapon systems. I've seen evidence that soldiers are fighting back, sometimes in very close combat. What do you think the casualties are like today?
I think they will be very high because clearly Putin is determined to get his way and to get it done as quickly as possible and just present the West with a fait accompli and the Ukrainians with a fait accompli. They're making good headway, the Russians, the invaders, in the northeast and from the north. They made substantial headway, but were stopped in the south from Crimea and on the Mariupol route. They are, it seems, avoiding the big cities and trying to, launch pincer-type movements in the form of a blitzkrieg to take the capital. I think not to occupy the capital, but to seize the government centers, to put out of action the government, the authorities, and set up their own puppet regime.
When I was a soldier and certainly in government, we would call this a decapitation tactic, where you take off the command and control. Do you know if the Ukrainian government is still functioning within Kyiv, or have they evacuated? Do they still have command and control of the country and the armed services?
It appears that they are still in Kyiv. The president went on TV today, this morning, and he said that I know I'm a prime target and my family, but I'm staying put. Well, he said, I'm staying put in Ukraine. It appeared from the background that he was in his offices, but who knows? I would probably imagine he's not, because of the missile strikes, and his administration is a prime target, right, and next door to the government buildings. The Minister of Defense also issued a statement today, seemingly from Kyiv. So I don't think they've fled, but I'm sure that they have arrangements made to run operations from another place if their situation in the center of Kyiv becomes untenable.
And how effective can local and regional governments in the oblast around the country, the regions, are they capable of keeping the country functioning within their areas of responsibility?
For the time being, they are. But if Russians occupy these major cities, particularly in the east and in the south, it would appear that some of the regional heads will go over to the Russians simply to save their lives, and will become puppet local leaders, or else be replaced by Russian proxies. However, that's not the important issue. The important issue is how will the population react? I mean, we've seen scenes today from Poltava in the east, where huge lines of men of all ages waiting to get their weapons. We assume they're all patriots, of course. Kharkiv, number 2 city in Ukraine, is encircled, but there have been very strong demonstrations of patriotism and readiness to defend this Russian-speaking city.
My sister-in-law woke up in Dnipro to shelling. How far into the interior are shells falling? I've seen reports where even Lviv has come under fire. Can you tell me
Well,
more?
it seems that the targets in the West are airports and military installations. So yesterday, for instance, in the first wave of attacks, Ivano-Frankivsk airport was hit. There was also a tower, a communications tower in Lutsk in the north, western Ukraine, in Volhynia. That was also a hit. And today, apparently, they've fired at the airports in Lviv. That's to be expected if they're trying to knock out the infrastructure. However, there haven't been reports that they are firing on the cities themselves, as they are in Kiev and elsewhere.
When I was covering the war in Syria, the issue became one of what we call collateral damage, which means civilians are getting killed despite supposedly a military target. Do you have any information about how civilians are faring when we see these pictures of rockets and missiles having fallen on apartment blocks, homes being destroyed? Can you tell us more?
I can't tell you more because I think the government is not really sharing the real figures in order to forestall panic. I know from my own staff and from their relatives that the bulk of the population spent the night in Kiev, and I'm sure in other cities, in shelters, in the metro, in in their basements. Several of my staff couldn't work this morning because they said we're stuck in basements and there's hardly any internet connection here, or I'm in the metro still because we're still afraid to go out. So yesterday I felt a very minimalistic figure of both the civilian and military casualties. I'm sure as time goes on, these figures will rise dramatically.
I am deeply concerned about people that are being displaced, what we would call DPREs, displaced persons, refugees, and evacuees. I've seen satellite photos going all the way up to the Hungarian and Polish borders, bumper to bumper, fuel's not to be had, lorries, trucks, cars there blocking the roads. Can you tell me about the civilian humanitarian movement and crisis that's unfolding?
Yeah. Well, remember that Ukraine has been at war with Russia for 8 years, and 1.6 million people have been displaced from there. The area under Russian control has been effectively ethnically cleansed. So we've got already a huge IDP, internally displaced population. Now, tens of thousands of people have fled from the major cities in the center of Ukraine, heading westward, hoping that this is a safe area. And of course, as the war heats up, uh, many of them are now trying to get across the border into EU countries, mainly into Poland, Romania, elsewhere. So yesterday, for example, my friends who were leaving Kiev, it took them 5 to 6 hours to just get out of Kiev, and another 5 or 6 hours to get to Lviv or Ivano-Frankivsk and whatever. We don't have a clear picture at this moment of what's happening in Odessa, which concerns me because that's always been a prime target for the Russians. And some people had hoped to get to Odessa on the sea, probably, more comfortable, but obviously in the danger zone too.
My sister-in-law tried to get there and was turned back. I have a report from friends in Turkey that a Turkish civilian vessel was fired upon by the Russian Navy. It was able to escape under its own steam. Is there any concern that the regional spillover, especially to a NATO partner like Turkey, might trigger Article 5 and we might see this as a much broader war than it is today?
Well, certainly that danger exists, and there could be all sorts of provocations or accidents, and it's not just Turkey. Look, yesterday, the Russians seized a strategically important island in the mouth of the Danube River between Romania and Ukraine, the Serpent or Snake Island. And sorry, my colleagues are calling from Kiev all the time. And this is on the doorstep of Romania. So if the Russians decide to put missiles there, this is as bad as Kaliningrad, and it also threatens the whole estuary of the Danube. So that's already a major thing. And then also remember the Chernobyl factor, which is not a military one, but if, for example, the Russians were to use Chernobyl for blackmailing purposes, they could always say, a stray Ukrainian missile hit the sarcophagus or the nuclear waste deposits. Who's to prove otherwise,
I'm very much concerned when I've been studying and traveled into the Donbass at the beginning of the war. The mines were filling up with water. The Russians weren't pumping them out. Groundwater was being polluted. It's an environmental disaster waiting to happen. Is there any concern that the reports I'm getting now from Finland and Sweden they are detecting spikes in radioactive particles? Is there any information that Chernobyl's been breached and that we're on the verge of a crisis there?
Look, there was heavy fighting there yesterday. One doesn't know what's happening because the area is now controlled by Russia. And so the Ukrainian sources are reporting the concern, but saying, look, we don't have access to these areas anymore. So we can't give you reliable information. We can only go on what Western sources are telling us. It's a bit similar to Chernobyl in 1986, when the first people to report were the Swedes and others.
I was actually on alert to go and provide assistance, but it was refused by the Kremlin. A couple more quick questions and I'll let you go. I know you have to get back to your journalist. What do Ukrainians think about the conduct of the West leading up to the war, where Germany only promised medical beds and helmets, and people were dragging their feet about real sanctions? What's the feeling? Do Ukrainians feel betrayed? Is there a sense of solidarity? What's that feeling?
Ukrainians, generally, the ones that I've met and spoken to, from officials down to the rank and file, all feel that they were let down and misunderstood, or not understood properly. You see, they wanted to be part of NATO eventually, but there was no illusion that NATO members would come and fight for them. Ukrainians were asking for weapons, particularly weapons to offset their disadvantaged position in dealing with missiles and aircraft coming in, the anti-air defense systems, ammunition. They wanted defensive systems. And it took so long for this to come. Maybe covertly there was a little bit coming, but on the scale that was needed to seriously hold back the Russians for a considerable time, it didn't come. And of course, Germany's stance didn't help at all. I mean, I hope they feel ashamed of themselves today, especially as they've now, seen Russia for what it is, and saying all sorts of bad things about their special partner for so long. Even Schroeder, who's in Naftogaz's board, is saying that Russia has done wrong to invade Ukraine. But look, this is late in the day. My friends, my journalists are saying, Bogdan, sanctions are important, and we're really happy that the West has turned up the screw, but they'll take forever to take effect. We are dying now. We need this help today, yesterday. What are sanctions going to do in the long term? Yes, they'll weaken Russia, but will there be a Ukrainian democracy, a European democracy called Ukraine in a week or two?
The Air Force has always been dwarfed by the Russians. Are there aircraft in the air? Is there any evidence of aerial combat, or are the skies quiet?
We don't know, but look, between 11 to 14, I've seen different figures, airfields, particularly military ones, were taken out of action yesterday. So one assumes that it's very difficult to get airborne, or that many aircraft of the remaining ones have been damaged. We are not seeing the sort of activity one would associate with air defense. However, yesterday there was an operation with helicopters, attack helicopters, to displace the airborne attack assault that the Russians had launched in Hostomel outside of Kiev that I mentioned in the airport there. So they managed to scrape together, I guess, enough helicopters to do that. Now, have they got sufficient air power still in eastern Ukraine, southern Ukraine to block the Russians? Difficult question to ask. I don't want to speculate, but I would fear for the worst, given the very targeted precision bombing that went on yesterday.
Yesterday, Vladimir Putin, in a grim warning, smiling, reminded reporters that Russia still has the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world. Is there anybody that you think will come to Ukraine's aid? Or do you think the chilling fear of what Russia has already done, Europe's dependence on energy products from Russia, and the threat of a nuclear holocaust will keep people from coming to Ukraine's aid?
Well, we assume that he'll never use the nuclear option, but he has shown himself to be not a rational leader, even if a sadistic, evil one. He's shown himself to be something of a madman, a second Hitler, because to launch an attack on a civilian population, a neighboring country of the sort that he has, and then to warn, as he did, that anyone who comes to Ukraine's help will experience worse repercussions than they've ever known in their history. What does that mean? This is a maniac speaking. This is Hitler speaking to us, a modern day Hitler. And this is what's frightening. Is the man fully in control of his faculties? And this is very frightening, because if he feels that I will either resurrect Russia's imperial greatness, or I will go down with the rest of the world, to hell with the rest of, après moi le déluge sort of thing, but a nuclear deluge, that's horrifying to think. And one would hope that his own people and his own entourage will take him out. I mean, I'm glad to see that some hundreds of Russians came out, braved the authorities in Moscow yesterday, but that's not enough. But what about within his own palace? Surely this is time for a palace coup. You've got to get rid of Nero or whoever the mad despot is. Otherwise, he's going to destroy us all.
In a psychological profile we did last week with a very good forensic psychiatrist, and in my article the other day, I talked about how Putin has surrounded himself with yes men. If you saw him humiliate publicly his Security Council, it's very clear that no one will challenge Putin, at least openly. He's isolated himself from his own people. The pandemic hasn't helped. It's questionable whether he's in touch with reality, but my biggest concern is this, and you will understand this, Bodhan, because you've been around the same amount of time I had in the same areas. Putin has now committed numerous war crimes. Those of us who are learned in the law, supposedly, I've counted no less than 16, and he's given us the photographic evidence of it. There's no going back for him. He won't be able to leave Russia and travel anywhere else. He's got nothing left to lose. And like Hitler in the final days of May, or the early days of May, he wanted to destroy Germany, saying that it didn't deserve to survive if he didn't. What is the future? I mean, he saw Gaddafi killed. He knows what happened to Saddam Hussein. He's facing numerous war crimes, and he's isolated. Last question. What's your feeling? Will he abandon all reason, if there's any left?
Well, as I've said before, he's something between a Nero, Caligula, and Hitler, and either the Praetorian Guard puts him in his place, which is underground, or we will have to live with the consequences, unforeseen consequences, for some time. Remember, he's not the only loony on the block. There's Lukashenko, who emulates his tactics and also humiliates his staff and uses terror techniques, and has become a vassal, 100% vassal of Putin. Belarus is a staging area while his own people are subjugated. So these are dark days for not just Ukraine and Belarus. It's their darkest moments in Europe's history since, since Hitler, I guess, because, but on the other hand, let's not just be so negative and so depressed. Europe has pulled together in recent weeks. The realization of what is at stake and who they're up against has finally hit home. And thank God that there have been several leaders who have stood up to Putin. And I'm glad Britain, I was born in Britain, have. Ireland has to its extent that it could. So have, Canada, of course, Washington late in the day, but nevertheless very importantly. But now that Germany and France are suddenly sounding a different note, that gives us hope, because the Poles, the Balts, and others have told them, look, wake up, okay, you're far away, and your own national interests and business concerns take precedence. But Europe is about all of us, not just about your Frankfurt and Paris.
I think my byline the other day, I ran a story that the future of Europe won't be decided in Brussels or The Hague or Paris or Berlin. It'll be decided in Kharkiv and Dnipro and Donetsk and in Kyiv.
It is being decided now, unfortunately. This is Europe's civilizations, if you want, front line, and the enemy is at the gates.
Bodhan, I want to let you go to get back to your work. Let's stay in touch. We'll dissect why Europe simply didn't want to believe that Putin is who he is for so long. Stay safe. If there's anything we can do, let us know.
Let us imbue some of the Irish spirit, which over the centuries helped you as a people not only survive, but reassert yourselves. And we pride ourselves that Ireland is interested in and is supportive of Ukraine in this moment of need.
And that is true. And let me just say that it took us 800 years to throw off the British. Let's hope it doesn't take more than 8 hours to do the same in Kiev. Let's stay optimistic. Bodhan, take care.
All the best. Thank you.
$300 million years ago, there was no Africa, Asia, Americas, or Europe. Just one big supercontinent, Pangea. And today, there is still a force connecting those divided by distance, reversing millions of years of rifting. Making far feel close, bringing there to here. Turkish Airlines,